She dropped her pre-flight checklist twice in the same week. Her hands trembled reading back fuel numbers a child could memorize. Nobody at the 71st Fighter Training Squadron thought Airman Basic Naomi Ellis would survive past week 3 of pilot training. What they didn't know, what none of them could possibly have known, was that her hands weren't shaking from fear of the aircraft. They were shaking from 6 years of quietly trying to forget how steady those same hands used to be back when steady was the only thing standing between her and a runway full of enemy fire. Before we go any further, same ask, quick and painless. Drop your city or country in the comments, hit subscribe if this is your first time here, and leave a like so more people find this one. It costs nothing, it takes 10 seconds, and it's the only thing that keeps this channel alive between videos. Now let's go back to the very beginning, to a woman standing alone on a sun-bleached flight line in Oklahoma, pretending, very carefully, that she had never touched the controls of anything faster than a rental car in her entire life. Nobody there had any idea what she used to be capable of. That was, after all, exactly the point. She had spent years perfecting the art of being overlooked, and it had worked flawlessly, right up until the day it didn't. The day a burning jet forced her to choose between staying invisible and saving a stranger's life. You don't survive 11 confirmed aerial kills by being loud. You survive by learning how to disappear completely, how to make a room forget you were ever standing in it. For 6 years, the only thing Naomi Ellis had flown was a desk job, then a diner counter on the night shift, then eventually nothing at all. Just silence, and a locked footlocker she never opened, and a version of herself that fit quietly into ordinary rooms without drawing a single glance. Now she stood on a cracked, sun-bleached tarmac in a flight suit 2 full sizes too big, sleeves rolled awkwardly, memorizing checklists she had once written from memory in the dark, under fire, without a single wasted word. Her instructor called her the mouse. Not to her face, not directly, behind her back, in the ready room, where laughter traveled faster and further than any radio chatter ever could. She let them say it. Mice don't get noticed. Mice don't get asked hard questions. And there were questions buried deep in her personnel file that no 20-something training officer on this base had the clearance to ask, let alone the imagination to guess at. She had chosen this base on purpose. Small, forgettable, a place with no operational squadrons worth watching closely. No reason for anyone to run her name through anything more thorough than a routine background check. A place to quietly relearn how to be nobody, one checklist at a time, one trembling readback at a time, until the trembling itself started to feel like the truth. What she hadn't planned on was a bird strike, a burning intake, and a voice on guard frequency that would drag her back into the sky whether she was ready to go or not. Nobody plans for the day their old life reaches up through the clouds and calls their name. The Oklahoma heat rose off the ramp in visible waves that afternoon, bending the horizon like something seen through a heat lamp bolted low over cracked asphalt. Jet fuel and hot rubber hung thick in the air, mixed with the metallic tang of ozone drifting off idling ground power units. That particular smell never truly left you, no matter how many years you spent trying to scrub it out of your memory with diner coffee and quiet mornings. Naomi breathed it in anyway, slowly, deliberately, the way some people breathe in the smell of rain before a storm they've been waiting for. She kept her sleeves buttoned tight at the wrist, even in 90-degree heat, sweat gathering under the cuff. Underneath, a thin white scar traced the bone, the kind you get from an ejection handle wrenched free half a second too fast, not the kind any training accident on record could ever explain away convincingly. Nobody had asked about it yet. She intended to keep it that way for as long as the universe would allow her that particular mercy. Her roommate, a chatty young crew chief named Priya Anand, once caught a glimpse of it in the shared bathroom mirror and asked, half joking, what on earth had happened. Kitchen accident, Naomi said, without blinking, without even slowing the rhythm of brushing her teeth. Priya believed her instantly. Everyone believed her, always. Lying steady wasn't a skill they taught you in any classroom. Combat taught you that, whether you wanted the lesson or not. At night, long after Priya's breathing evened out into sleep across the room, Naomi still caught herself counting seconds between imaginary radar sweeps, an old habit her body refused to retire just because the rest of her had asked it to. Some reflexes don't care what uniform you're currently wearing. The 71st Fighter Training Squadron flew sleek white T-38 Talons for its advanced students, jets that howled overhead like something pulled straight out of a dream Naomi used to have, back before the dreams quietly curdled into something else entirely, something she stopped talking about years ago. She was cleared for nothing more than basic contact work, pattern rides, gentle stalls, the kind of low-stakes flying that wouldn't strain a visibly trembling hand or draw a second glance from anyone paying attention. Major Cole Briggs, her primary flight instructor, had flown 2 combat tours himself and never once let anyone in earshot forget it. He walked the flight line like he personally owned the weather, the runway, and everyone standing on it. When he watched Naomi's hand shake during her very first simulator ride, he didn't bother dropping his voice for privacy. Some people, he announced to the entire ready room, loud enough to carry, just aren't built for this line of work. No shame in that. Some folks are better suited elsewhere. She said absolutely nothing. She filed the comment away the way she filed everything difficult, carefully, without a flicker of visible expression, into a drawer inside herself she kept locked most days of the week. But that night, alone in the equipment room long after everyone else had gone home, she ran her thumb slowly over the worn inner seam of an old flight glove, shaped by years of use no training glove had ever earned. She meant to leave that glove behind for good. She still didn't fully understand why it kept ending up in the bottom of her bag, tucked beneath spare socks and a half-empty bottle of aspirin, as if some part of her still wasn't finished with it yet, no matter how many times she told herself otherwise on quiet, ordinary nights like this one. On a Tuesday that started exactly like every other forgettable Tuesday, a young lieutenant named Danny Kowalski taxied out in an F-16 Viper borrowed from the adjacent operational squadron for a routine joint currency flight, call sign Comet 2. Naomi wasn't scheduled to fly that particular day. She was on the ramp finishing pre-flight paperwork, invisible in her oversized flight suit, clipboard tucked under one arm, when the first radio call cracked flat across base frequency. Comet 2, tower, be advised. Birds reported over the approach end. Use caution on departure. Kowalski was 24 years old, confident to the point of carelessness, 6 short weeks out of formal training. Exactly the kind of pilot who treated caution advisories as background noise rather than instructions. He rogered the call without so much as slowing his climb rate. Naomi's head came up off the clipboard before she had consciously decided to start listening at all. Something tightened low in her chest, an old and very specific kind of tightening she hadn't felt in years, not since the last time she'd sat behind a stick where the outcome genuinely mattered. She told herself firmly it was nothing. She told herself twice to keep filling out the paperwork in front of her like a good, quiet airman basic. She was still repeating that instruction to herself when the first flat, wrong-sounding bang came crackling over the radio, followed almost immediately by a scream of engine noise that had absolutely no business existing anywhere near a clear afternoon sky. Every head on the ramp turned toward the horizon at once. But Naomi's ears had already told her exactly what her eyes hadn't found yet, a familiar wrongness in the pitch that no amount of civilian silence had managed to erase from her memory. Comet 2, Mayday, Mayday, I've got a flame-out compressor stall, smoke building in the cockpit. Kowalski's voice cracked violently halfway through the transmission, the rehearsed calm of training bleeding out fast into something far rawer and much more honest. A bird strike. Full ingestion by the sound of it. Exactly the kind of failure that turned a routine currency sortie into a genuine coin flip in under 4 seconds. The tower controller's voice thinned and sped up instantly, calling emergency vehicles, clearing the pattern of every other aircraft, doing everything strictly by the book while the book quietly, visibly failed to keep pace with what was actually unfolding overhead. Major Briggs took off running for the command truck, already barking demands for altitude and airspeed readouts that nobody on the ground yet possessed. Naomi's clipboard hit the tarmac with a flat slap. She didn't remember consciously dropping it. Her eyes were already tracking the thin gray smoke trail arcing low over the distant tree line, doing rapid math nobody had asked her to do: altitude loss, sink rate, distance remaining to the numbers. The exact same silent math that used to keep her alive for a living, once upon a very different life. "Somebody get her off the ramp," Briggs snapped at a nearby maintenance technician without even glancing her way. "This is no place for a student to be standing around gawking." Naomi didn't move an inch. Her eyes stayed locked on the smoke, reading it the way another person might read a sentence. Angle, color, thickness, all of it telling her something specific about what was burning and how badly. Whatever she was seeing, it made the muscles along her jaw tighten in a way none of her training instructors had ever once witnessed. Comment 2, say fuel state, say souls on board. The tower controller radioed, his voice climbing a full octave in the space of one sentence. Kowalski's reply came back garbled, half swallowed by static, and something dangerously close to outright panic bleeding through the transmission. "One soul. Engine's not relighting. I've got a fire warning light, I don't." Briggs grabbed the ramp radio himself, barking out instructions that were technically correct, straight from the emergency procedures checklist, and roughly half a beat too slow for what was actually happening a mile and a half out over the trees. Naomi could hear it clearly in the raw engine audio bleeding through the truck speakers. This wasn't a simple, textbook flameout. There was compressor damage in that sound, possibly structural damage as well. She stepped forward without consciously deciding to move at all. "He's got asymmetric thrust bleed," she said, quiet but unmistakably clear, cutting straight through the noise on the ramp. "That's not a clean flameout profile. Tell him to check hydraulic pressure carefully before he even attempts an air start." Briggs turned sharply, irritation flashing across his face like he'd genuinely forgotten this particular airman could speak. "Airman, step back. This is not a training exercise." "I know exactly what this is," Naomi said evenly. "That's precisely why you need to listen to me right now." Nobody standing on that ramp had ever once heard the mouse raise her voice before that moment. Even Briggs, mid-sentence, stopped talking entirely, as if some old instinct in him had recognized authority before his conscious mind caught up to the fact. Briggs stared at her for exactly 1 second too long to be comfortable for anyone watching, the kind of silence a room uses to decide whether to laugh or start listening seriously. Then the radio cracked open again, Kowalski's voice thinner now, edging closer to genuine terror. "Losing hydraulics fast, controls getting heavy, really heavy. I don't know what to do here." "Give her the mic," said a voice Naomi barely recognized as her own, low and certain in a way her voice hadn't sounded in years. Briggs didn't move a muscle. His jaw worked once, then twice, some old and stubborn certainty about who belonged in this particular conversation warring visibly against the sound of a dying jet screaming a mile out. It was Priya, the crew chief, who finally grabbed the handset off the truck dashboard and shoved it firmly into Naomi's open hand without asking anyone's permission first. "Comment 2. This is..." Naomi paused for half a breath, an old and very specific call sign rising unbidden to the back of her throat before she swallowed it firmly back down where it belonged. "This is ground support. Check your hydraulic gauge right now. Tell me exactly what number you're seeing." Static hissed for a long moment. Then, small and startled, Who is this?" "Someone who has done exactly this before," Naomi said calmly. "Now talk to me, and don't stop talking. Every second you're quiet is a second I'm guessing instead of knowing." Around her, the ramp had gone strangely still, as though the entire base was holding its breath along with the pilot she couldn't see, waiting to find out whether the quiet airman had any idea what she was actually doing. Kowalski's hydraulic pressure had dropped to a dangerously thin fraction of normal operating range, the kind of number that quietly turned a controllable fighter jet into little more than a heavy suggestion box. Naomi's mind slid into a rhythm she hadn't consciously used in years. Checklist logic and pure instinct braided together so tightly there was no visible seam between them anymore. "Comment 2. Confirm your flight control system has dropped into alternate mode," she said, steady and flat, using the exact clipped register she used to reserve for a very different kind of radio, a very different kind of sky. If the stick forces feel unusually heavy, that's expected right now. Don't fight the jet. Let it gently. Copy that. It's heavy. It's really heavy. Good. That heaviness means the system is doing exactly what it's designed to do. Trim nose up in small increments only. Small. You are not wrestling a delivery truck down a hill. She glanced sideways at Briggs, who had gone completely quiet, headset pressed hard against one ear, as though he genuinely needed to confirm he was hearing all of this correctly. Behind her, someone murmured, "How does she possibly know all that?" Not really phrased as a question anymore, more like a quiet confession that something fundamental in the world had just silently shifted without anyone's permission. Naomi didn't answer. She was already 3 steps ahead of the wounded jet, already seeing the runway the exact way she used to see runways, back when the stakes were measured in far more than a training scorecard on someone's clipboard. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a checklist she thought she'd forgotten years ago was reading itself off, line by line, in a voice that sounded uncomfortably like her own. "Fuel state, say again," Naomi asked sharply, cutting straight through Kowalski's rising, static-laced breathing on the frequency. 600 pounds, maybe less. I don't have a clean burn reading on the gauge at all. That's enough fuel for exactly one approach. If you fly it clean the very first time," she said, voice never rising even slightly, "you will not get a second attempt, so we're going to do this precisely right, together, right now." Her tone dropped, if anything, into something almost gentle, the particular register reserved for people who needed genuine calm far more than they needed volume in their ear. Briggs stepped closer, staring at her now instead of watching the smoke trail, some private calculation happening behind his eyes that had nothing whatsoever to do with airspeed or sink rate anymore. "Airman Ellis," he said carefully, almost cautiously, like the name itself might rearrange her into someone he actually recognized. "How exactly do you know flight control degradation protocols for an aircraft type you have never once been officially checked out in?" Naomi kept her eyes locked on the distant smoke trail, now visibly lower, wobbling unsteadily like something wounded and struggling to stay upright in the air. "Not now, sir. Please. That is not remotely a normal training answer, Airman." "No," she agreed quietly, without looking away from the sky. "It really isn't. Ask me again once he's on the ground, sir. I promise you I'll still be standing here." Briggs didn't push further. Something in her tone had made the question feel, suddenly, oddly beside the point, the way a warning light stops mattering once you're already committed to the landing. "Comet 2, gear coming down in 3, 2, 1. Call it out to me," Naomi said, ignoring Briggs entirely now. Every last ounce of her attention narrowed down to a jet she couldn't physically see and a frightened voice she could barely hear over the growing rush of wind noise flooding his cockpit through a cracked canopy seal. "Gears down. 3 green, I think. Hydraulics are barely holding pressure at all. That's all you need in this world right now. 3 green is 3 green. Full stop. Fly the jet in front of you. Don't fly the gauge on the panel." She could picture his exact posture in that cockpit without needing to see it, white-knuckled on the stick, leaning hard forward against the harness straps, the very particular kind of fear that made pilots overcorrect at precisely the worst possible moment. She'd worn that same fear once herself, a lifetime and an entirely different uniform ago, in a cockpit far more hostile than this one. The base fire trucks rolled slowly out toward the runway overrun, lights spinning silently under the flat, indifferent afternoon sun. Priya stood frozen nearby, the radio handset cord looped loosely around one wrist, watching Naomi the exact way you watch someone doing complicated long division entirely in their head and somehow getting every single digit right without a single pause. "She's not reading any of this off a card," Priya whispered to absolutely no one in particular. Nobody answered her. Nobody standing there could afford to stop listening long enough to even try answering. Even the fire crew, normally chattering over their own radio channel, had gone quiet, ears tuned to a frequency that wasn't technically theirs to monitor. "You're going to feel the jet want to roll left on short final. That is completely normal with this exact configuration. Do not chase it with a stick," Naomi said, watching the smoke trail bend lower and closer, the unmistakable shape of a jet fighting gravity and its own broken hydraulics at the very same time. Small corrections only. I need you boring right now, Lieutenant, not brave. A choked half-laugh crackled back over the radio, the unmistakable sound a man too genuinely scared to fully realize he was still somehow capable of humor under pressure. Boring. Copy that. Trying. Briggs had stopped even pretending to run this emergency and was simply staring at Naomi now, headset forgotten and hanging loosely around his neck, the way you stare a locked door someone has just quietly opened from the wrong side entirely. Ellis, he said again, quieter this time, almost careful in a way she'd never once heard from him. Where exactly did you learn to talk a pilot down like this, calm as anything? She didn't answer him. Her eyes stayed fixed on a single point above the tree line where a wounded jet was about to become either a landing or tomorrow's grim headline. Comet 2, altitude call, please right now, 500 feet. 500. Losing pressure again, it's dropping. Then you're exactly where you need to be for this approach. Keep talking to me, don't go quiet on me now. Behind her, she heard someone key a second radio and start relaying her exact words to the tower, word for word, like her voice had suddenly become the only frequency that mattered on the entire base, the only thing standing between a wounded jet and a very different ending. 300 feet, and your sink rate is running a little high, Naomi said, and for the very first time her voice carried the faintest possible edge, not panic exactly, just pure precision sharpening down to a fine and deliberate point. Ease the nose up, gently, gently, Lieutenant. You do not muscle a jet that's already badly hurting. You coax it. I've got it. I've got it, I think. His voice had gone thin and young, completely stripped of every layer of training command bravado it had carried at the start of this same terrible day. Whatever the Air Force had carefully built into him over the last 6 weeks, it was Naomi's steady voice doing the actual holding right now, second by second. Behind her, the base operations officer came running out onto the ramp, drawn by a description over the radio net that matched absolutely no name on the day's official flight schedule. He stopped a few feet short of Briggs, breathless, staring at the airman calmly holding the handset like she had somehow materialized directly out of the pavement itself. "Oh," he started, gasping slightly. "Who exactly is running this recovery right now?" Briggs opened his mouth, closed it again without a single word. For possibly the first time in his entire career, he genuinely didn't have a ready answer waiting, and the silence of that alone said more than any explanation could have. The smoke trail dipped abruptly below the tree line. The radio went completely silent for one long, terrible, stretched-out second, and on the ramp nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody so much as shifted their weight, as if stillness itself might somehow help him stay in the air a moment longer. Then Kowalski's voice cracked back through, ragged and thin with pure adrenaline. "Runway in sight. I'm high. I'm coming in high." "You're fine," Naomi said, and something in the exact flatness of her tone made 3 grown men standing on that ramp go completely and instantly still. "High is survivable, Lieutenant. Fast and low is not survivable. Bleed the energy off gradually, don't dive it off all at once. Trust the jet, it is still flying, it wants to fly." The F-16 came screaming over the perimeter fence lower than any regulation technically allowed, trailing a thin gray ribbon of smoke behind it, wings rocking with the particular unsteady rhythm of a pilot fighting his own panicked instincts instead of trusting the actual airplane beneath him. Naomi's free hand curled slowly at her side, the only visible outward sign of tension she permitted herself in that entire moment. Power back now, right now," she said, and for half a second her voice dropped into something clipped and strangely foreign, an inflection that clearly belonged to a different radio, a different sky, a different and far more dangerous war entirely. Nobody noticed the shift except Briggs, who quietly filed it away alongside the growing pile of questions already stacking up behind his eyes. The main gear hit the runway hard, a sharp bark of rubber and smoke, the nose wheel slamming down half a beat later. The jet skidded violently, shuddered once, and, almost impossibly, held the center line, riding straight down the painted line like it had been flown by someone who had done this exact thing 100 times before in worse conditions, with far less runway to work with. 4 full seconds, nobody standing on that ramp remembered to breathe at all. Then the fire trucks were moving fast, foam cannons swinging into firing position. And Kowalski's voice came back over the radio, sounding like a man who had just suddenly remembered how his own lungs were supposed to work. Down, I'm actually down. Oh my God, I'm down safe. Nice work, Lieutenant, Naomi said quietly, and lowered the handset like it weighed absolutely nothing at all. Like she hadn't just talked a burning, crippled jet safely onto a runway using a voice she had deliberately buried years ago and never planned on using again. She handed the handset back to Priya without meeting a single person's eyes directly. The ramp itself erupted into noise almost immediately. Radios crackling, engines revving, someone cheering loudly near the fire trucks in pure relief. But the small, tight circle of people immediately surrounding Naomi stayed completely and eerily silent, staring at her like she had just quietly stepped directly out of a different, far larger story than the one they all thought they'd been living that afternoon. Briggs found his voice first, though it came out rough and uneven. Where, he said slowly, did an airman basic possibly learn to do all of that? Naomi looked at him for a long, measuring moment, watching the mouse mask slide carefully back into place like a door quietly closing on a room. I should probably get back to my paperwork now, sir, if that's all right. She turned and walked calmly off the ramp, and for once, remarkably, nobody standing there even tried to stop her. Behind her, the questions kept building, unspoken, waiting for an answer nobody there yet had the clearance to receive. The formal incident review began that very same evening, moving considerably faster than any base investigation Naomi had personally ever witnessed unfold, and she had witnessed a fair number of them over the years from a very different vantage point entirely. Standard procedure following any emergency landing meant immediately pulling the flight data recorder off Comet 2, the small armored orange box responsible for silently logging every control input, every radio transmission, every single number that mattered when things went catastrophically wrong. She wasn't present in the room when a maintenance officer finally connected the recorder to his analysis laptop, but Priya told her about it later that night, in a voice that clearly hadn't fully settled back down yet. The recorder, it turned out, had captured absolutely everything. Kowalski's panicked breathing, Naomi's steady, unwavering instructions over the guard frequency, and something else entirely buried deep inside the accompanying metadata stream that nobody on that base had been expecting to find at all. A voice-print match request, triggered automatically whenever an unidentified party took direct control of an active emergency, had pinged something buried inside a classified cross-reference database nobody at the 71st had clearance to glimpse. The query came back flagged, not cleared, not explained, simply flagged, with a single word attached to the header that meant nothing to the maintenance officer reading it, and apparently everything to whoever received that alert 3 levels up the chain that same night. The word attached to that flag was a call sign. Nobody stationed on that entire base had ever once heard it spoken aloud before that evening. Somebody, somewhere far above their pay grade, clearly had heard it many times before. By the following morning, 2 men in unremarkable plain civilian clothes were already sitting quietly inside the base commander's office, and Major Briggs had been asked, politely but very firmly, to personally escort Airman Basic Naomi Ellis in for a conversation that appeared on absolutely no official training schedule anywhere. She walked in already knowing exactly what was coming. In that particular way you sometimes know weather is arriving well before the sky itself actually changes color overhead. We pulled the flight recorder, the older of the 2 men said without preamble, sliding a single printed page carefully across the desk toward her. No introduction offered, no visible rank insignia anywhere, nothing but a quiet, settled authority worn like a comfortable second uniform. VoicePrint match came back at 98% confidence against an archived file from something called Operation Coldwater. Naomi didn't bother reaching for the page in front of her. She already knew, word for word, exactly what it said. Call sign Halcyon. The man continued steadily, Watching her face closely for any reaction, she carefully declined to give him. Confirmed flight lead, classified Special Operations Air Wing. 6 full years of documented service that nobody currently in this particular room was cleared to know anything about until roughly 1 hour ago. He paused deliberately for effect. 11 confirmed enemy aircraft kills on record. The single most decorated pilot in that entire program's history, according to a file that technically, on paper, doesn't officially exist anywhere. Briggs, standing quietly near the door, visibly went the pale color of chalk dust. One hand braced against the frame like the floor had shifted slightly beneath him without warning. "You're Halcyon," Briggs said slowly, almost reverently, like saying the word itself out loud might somehow rearrange her back into someone he actually recognized from a briefing room years earlier. The Halcyon, the one from those old after-action briefings we studied back at the academy. The ghost pilot nobody could ever officially confirm was even a real, living person, let alone find. "I was a real person," Naomi said quietly, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in weeks. "I still am one as it happens. I simply didn't want to be that particular person anymore. Not after everything that program eventually cost me." The intelligence officer flipped the page toward her without comment, revealing a grainy reconnaissance photograph. A jet silhouette hanging against a burning skyline she remembered in far more vivid, painful detail than any single photograph could ever properly hold or convey. 6 confirmed kills in a single engagement over a heavily contested corridor, he read aloud, evenly. Solo intercept, 0 wingman support available. Aircraft returned to base with less than 4 minutes of usable fuel remaining in the tanks. Naomi's jaw tightened visibly, the very first genuine crack in 6 long years of carefully maintained, deliberate stillness. "That particular mission cost me people I still don't talk about to anyone, ever," she said. "The kill count printed on that page was never once the part that actually mattered to me." The room went completely silent for a long moment. Outside, on the flight line below, the sirens from yesterday's emergency had long since faded away entirely, replaced now by the ordinary, comforting hum of a base with absolutely no idea what had just quietly walked among them, wearing a training patch 2 full sizes too big for a frame. "Why here, of all places?" Briggs finally asked, his voice finding something resembling its old certainty again, though it had lost every trace of the confidence he used to carry around the flight line like a second sidearm. "Why hide inside a basic training squadron, flying gentle pattern work in a talon? When you used to fly," he gestured vaguely toward the photograph, unable to finish that particular sentence out loud. "Because absolutely nobody asks hard questions of the person nobody bothers watching closely," Naomi said simply. "Because I needed somewhere quiet enough to figure out whether I even still wanted to fly at all, after everything Coldwater ultimately cost to earn those 11 kills." She looked down at her own hands, steady now, in a way they genuinely hadn't been during any pre-flight checklist for weeks on end. "It turns out you can't actually decide something like that sitting behind a desk. You have to be back inside a cockpit, even a very small, unremarkable one, to truly find out for certain." The intelligence officer closed the file folder in front of him with a soft thud. "Command wants to know whether you're willing to have this conversation formally, on the record. Full reactivation, complete clearance restored, an actual squadron that knows exactly what you're capable of doing." Naomi was quiet for a long, considered moment, staring past all 3 men at the flight line visible through the office window, at a runway with a fresh black skid mark still clearly visible near the threshold. "Ask me again once I've finished my current qualification," she said finally, firmly. "I'm not quite finished being nobody yet. Not just yet." The intelligence officer studied her for a moment, then nodded once, as if that answer told him more about her than the entire classified file had. Kowalski found her later that same afternoon out on the flight line, still dressed in his flight suit, a fresh white bandage wrapped around one hand from the hard landing rollout. He stopped several feet away, visibly unsure whether he should salute a fellow student pilot or something else entirely different. "They told me who you actually are," he said carefully. "Halcyon, 11 confirmed kills." I tried looking you up online afterward. Well, tried to anyway. Most of it's apparently still fully classified. Most of it should probably stay exactly that way. Naomi said, not unkindly at all. You talked me down through all of that like it was absolutely nothing, he said. Like you weren't even scared for one single second. She considered his words for a long moment, watching a maintenance crew slowly tow the damaged F-16 toward the hangar, its intake scorched black around a deep, jagged gouge. I was completely terrified, she said finally, honestly, the entire time, start to finish. Being scared and knowing exactly what to do next aren't actually opposites, Lieutenant. Sometimes they're the exact same feeling, just wearing two very different faces. Kowalski nodded slowly, like that particular sentence would take him considerably longer than one single afternoon to fully understand and absorb. Thank you, he said quietly. And for the record, the mouse thing, the nickname. Nobody's ever calling you that again, not on my watch. They can call me whatever helps them sleep at night. Naomi said simply. I already know exactly what I did today. That's genuinely enough for me. Kowalski nodded once more, then walked off toward the hangar, glancing back at her twice before he finally disappeared inside. Briggs approached her at the very end of the day, near the now empty flight line where the shadows had grown long and gold. That particular hush that settles gently over an airfield once the engines have finally stopped for the night. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there quietly, hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking like a man carefully recalculating 6 entire weeks of certainty all at once. I called you unfit, he said eventually, voice low. In front of the entire flight room, no less. You did, Naomi agreed simply. I was wrong about you. Completely wrong. You didn't know any better, she said, and there was no real bitterness in her voice at all, just the flat, familiar exhaustion of someone who had spent 6 deliberate years being underestimated on purpose and had almost forgotten what it genuinely felt like to be truly seen by another person. That was always the entire point of the disguise, Major. It worked exactly the way it was designed to work, right up until the moment it simply couldn't work anymore. He studied her carefully for a long moment, something quietly shifting behind his eyes that looked almost like genuine respect, trying to find its proper shape for the very first time. For whatever it's worth, he said finally, I would fly your wing any single day of the week, without hesitation. Naomi allowed herself the smallest possible smile, tired around the edges, but entirely genuine. I'll hold you to exactly that, sir. Right after I finish my check ride. Briggs almost smiled back, an expression that looked slightly unfamiliar on his face after 6 weeks of nothing but sharp edges. The formal debrief happened 3 full days later inside a windowless room that had considerably more brass in attendance than the base had seen gathered in one place in over a decade. Naomi sat calmly at the center of the long table, back perfectly straight, hands finally steady, answering pointed questions about cold water and careful, clipped sentences that gave away exactly as much detail as regulations strictly required, and not one single word more than that. When the debrief finally ended, the base commander himself walked her out personally, an almost unheard-of gesture for an airman basic of her nominal rank. At the door, he stopped abruptly, turned around, and, to the visible shock of 2 lieutenants passing by in the hallway, offered her a proper, formal salute, the exact kind reserved for a rank she technically hadn't been officially reissued just yet. Halcyon, he said simply, welcome back to the sky. It's been waiting for you. Naomi returned the salute crisply, automatically, muscle memory surfacing instantly from somewhere deep she had tried very hard to bury permanently. Thank you, sir, she said quietly. I'd still like to finish my Talon qualification first, if that's all right with command. There are some old habits I'd genuinely like to rebuild slowly on my own terms this time. He nodded, understanding considerably more than he actually said out loud in that moment. Take whatever time the sky is willing to give you back, Airman. You've certainly earned it. He turned to leave, then paused, adding quietly, the offer to reactivate stands as long as you need it to. Priya found her afterward sitting quietly in the equipment room, perched on an upturned metal crate, running her thumb slowly along the worn seam of that old flight glove she'd carried her bag since day one and never once explained to a single soul. Priya didn't ask any questions this time around. She simply sat down beside her, close enough for genuine company, far enough away to respect her privacy. "Kitchen accident," Priya said eventually, nodding gently toward the faint scar visible on Naomi's wrist, offering the old joke back gently, without any real edge to it. "I believed you completely, for whatever that's worth to you now." "I know you did," Naomi said softly. "That was genuinely kind of you, believing me like that. You could have told me the truth, you know, at any point. I could have told a great many people a great many things," Naomi said, turning the worn glove over once in her hands before carefully tucking it back into her bag. "Some stories aren't actually lighter for being shared out loud, Priya. Some of them you simply have to carry quietly until you're finally ready to set them down somewhere solid enough to hold their weight." Priya was quiet for a long moment, watching the last of the daylight fade slowly to gold across the hangar doors in front of them. "Is this solid enough?" she asked eventually. "Here, I mean, this base. Us as friends." Naomi considered the question far longer than it probably deserved, then nodded once, slow and entirely certain. "Yeah," she said finally. "I think it genuinely might be, actually." Priya smiled, satisfied, and didn't push for anything more than that small, honest answer. A full week later, Naomi flew her official Toulon check ride in clean, thoroughly unremarkable weather, with no fanfare whatsoever and no audience beyond her single assigned evaluator sitting quietly in the back seat. She flew it exactly the way a genuinely promising student should fly it. Competent, careful, still visibly building her confidence back up one maneuver at a time, patiently. Nobody watching from the tower that particular day would have ever guessed those same steady hands had once logged 11 confirmed kills over a classified war most of them would never once be clear to hear a single detail about. Briggs signed off on her evaluation form personally, and beneath all the standard checkboxes, he carefully added a single handwritten line that Training Command had genuinely never once seen from him before in his entire career. "Exceptional composure under extreme pressure. Recommend for advanced track immediately. Pilot's discretion fully respected in this instance." He didn't mention cold water anywhere on the form. He didn't need to. That evening, Naomi walked out to the empty flight line completely alone, the sky doing its slow, familiar orange collapse into evening, jet noise gradually fading into the ordinary hush of a base quietly settling down for the night ahead. She stood there for a long moment, hands loose and steady at her sides, calm now in a way that had absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone watching or not watching at all. Somewhere behind her, a young airman was already retelling the story of the flight recorder to a small group of wide-eyed new arrivals, the tale already half-legend, already growing richer with each retelling. Naomi didn't bother correcting a single detail. Some stories were allowed to grow a little, so long as the quietest, truest part stayed exactly where she had left them. She never once asked anyone to call her Halcyon again. Not formally, not casually, not even once. Around the squadron, whenever the story eventually got told, and it got told often the months that followed, people mostly just called her Ellis, said quietly and respectfully, "The particular way you say a name you've genuinely learned means far more than it first let on at the surface." She liked it considerably better that way, if she was honest with herself. Quiet had never actually been the disguise, not really. Quiet was simply who she had deliberately chosen to become again, fully, on her own terms this time around. If this story hit you somewhere honest tonight, do me one more favor before you go. Drop a comment and tell me exactly what you would have done, standing in that ready room, watching someone you'd quietly underestimated for weeks pick up a radio like it was the single most natural thing in the world. Hit that like button too. It genuinely helps more people stumble onto these stories when they need them most. And if you're new here tonight, go ahead and subscribe, because there's always another quiet one out there that absolutely nobody saw coming until it mattered most. Until next time, keep your eyes open for the ones who never ask for the credit. They're usually the ones who've already earned it, twice over, in places you and I will never once get the clearance to know about. Somewhere out there tonight, there's probably another quiet one standing on another ramp, checklist trembling slightly in her hands, waiting for the moment nobody else saw coming. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.